Hey everyone! Welcome back for part 2 of 2.5 Dimensional Seduction. If you skipped part 1, make sure to watch that first. Let me fill you in on what you missed. After going through enough heartbreak with real girls, Masamune swore he'd stay away from them and focus all his love on 2D girls from his manga and anime. But then Ririsa, a newbie cosplayer who looks exactly like Masamune's favorite 2D character, shows up. Will this girl finally open his heart again? Oh, and before we continue, please hit that subscribe button. We couldn't do this without your support, and we really appreciate every bit of it. Thank you so much. Our story starts with the glorification of the cosplay culture, which mostly features female cosplayers in skimpy outfits, and male photographers running about with their cameras. Then again, cosplaying is a serious business that shouldn't be taken lightly, which I may or may not have been a part of at some point. Anyways, those girls are not the protagonists of this story, though. The scene then focuses on the real protagonist, Masamune, who also happens to be the president and only member of the manga club at his school. While his schoolmates are getting busy trying to recruit new members to their clubs, he hides himself in the club room, obsessing over his favorite 2D character, LILI. Suddenly, a four-eyed girl disturbs his peace, much to Masamune's surprise. Her name is Ririsa, a first-year student who hopes to enter the club. At first, Masamune is apprehensive about her presence, but after he discovers that she is also an otaku, as much as he is, not to mention her favorite character being LILI as well, he just couldn't not accept her. However, as it turns out, Ririsa has more spunk than she first let on. Believing that Masamune is someone who could help and understand her, Ririsa reveals that she's actually passionate about cosplaying and is in fact dreaming of making her own cosrome. After revealing her secret that she allegedly had not shared with anyone before, Ririsa asks Masamune if he could become her photographer. At first, Masamune was reluctant, but after Ririsa cosplayed LILI in front of him, once again he can't just say no. In fact, he even takes photos of her in his phone for test shoots, and she loved every piece of it. After an unexpected accident that made Masamune feel super awkward, he heads out first, leaving Ririsa on her own with a racing heart. The next day, we are introduced to the supermodel MIRI, who also happens to be a new transfer student claiming to hate manga and who seems to be somehow related to Masamune. Meanwhile, at the manga club, Ririsa informs Masamune about the new transfer student in her class. She excitedly tells him how the new student is perfect to cosplay as her partner. The conversation then turned to whether Masamune was really willing to be her photographer or not. When Masamune told her that he was in fact taking this role as seriously as he can, she asked him to take more pictures of her for practice using the club's camera. Unfortunately, she didn't have her costumes with her, so she decided to just make do with her school uniform. Everything seemed to be going well until she saw the pictures that Masamune took and felt so self-conscious. Later that afternoon, after an accident in the hallway involving Mikari and her admirers, the supermodel unexpectedly found her way to the manga club room. She excitedly hugged Masamune, revealing that she's actually a tsundere and hiding the fact that she's head over heels for him. As it turns out, Mikari is Masamune's childhood friend. Back when they were still kids, Masamune had saved her from bullies, and ever since then she'd always wanted to attract his attention. And when she realized that Masamune only had eyes for 2D girls, she actually made an effort to cater to his hobbies. That is up until 5 years ago when she was scouted to become a model and had to leave the city to pursue a career. Mikari had hoped that 5 years would be enough to change him, but as it so happens, he's still the same. Despite everything, though, she realized that she still can't hate him and is still very much into him, and so she leaves him in the club room with bittersweet tears. Not long after, Mikari found herself on the rooftop where she had the perfect view of the club room and of Masamune. She was ecstatic to find the spot, that is, until she saw a girl entering the club room. With no time to waste, Mikari dashes into the club room. The scene she saw the moment she opened the door sent her into tears. Masamune was blushing while holding a camera and in the act of taking pictures of the girl. Mikari was so upset that she started hitting Masamune and would have probably continued doing so if it weren't for Ririsa calling out to her and pointing out how they are in the same class. Once Ririsa finally caught her attention, she then asks Mikari if she wants to cosplay with her. That was when the supermodel took a good look at Ririsa and asked if she's LILI. Ririsa explained to the stunned Mikari that she's cosplaying LILI and was even generous enough to educate the supermodel on what it's all about. After some back and forth between the trio and Ririsa explaining to her the situation between her and Masamune, Mikari eventually agreed to cosplay with her for the COSPLAY. At first, Mikari demanded that she wants to be LILI, seeing as it's Masamune's favorite character. Although she had no choice but to concede after seeing that appearance-wise, Ririsa is the best choice to cosplay the blonde angel. That said, she accepted cosplaying Miriella, another character in the Ashford Chronicles, and just so happens to be Liliel's bestie. Well, it's not like Mikari hates the character. In fact, growing up, she couldn't help but sympathize with Miriella's character, who had an unrequited love for the main character Ashford, who in turn is in love with Liliel, much like the situation the trio are in at the moment. Mikari was amazed at Ririsa's dedication after she stayed up late last night just to finish the Miriella costume, not to mention its Liliel counterpart, especially since Ririsa was pretty particular with the detail, insisting that the fans would definitely notice it if she wasn't. Although reluctant at first to wear the super skimpy costume, Mikari eventually gets into character as she poses and acts as Miriella while showing her affection for Ashford, in this case to Masamune, not long after they started taking pictures for the COSPLAY. Unfortunately, the photo session eventually ended in a failure after Mikari tells Ririsa that she can't use the photos they took together for public use since it would go against her contract as a model. Ririsa was of course upset that the photos will just end up being shelved. Nevertheless, she'll definitely cherish them. Mikari also admitted that she doesn't mind doing the group cosplay again with Ririsa. After all, in a way it was a step closer to getting Masamune to look at her the way that she wants to. As for Ririsa, she couldn't help feeling something strange seeing Mikari and Masamune chat together, although she chose to ignore it for now. On a different note, Ririsa tells Masamune that, even excluding the unusable photos they took with Mikari, they still have enough photos to make a proper COSPLAY. They have to work overtime though if they want to finish preparing the photos and sold it in the upcoming event which Ririsa had also booked a space for. There was just about a week left, and they had to edit about 500 photos. Although it was Ririsa who had to do all the major works, Masamune made sure that he's always there to support her by doing the menial tasks. Fast forward to a week later, Ririsa finally managed to finish editing all the pictures for the COSPLAY, and what's left is just to burn them into the DVDs. Both Ririsa and Masamune are just really glad that the week-long preparation for the event is finally over. Speaking of the event, Ririsa informs Mikari about it. Of course, Mikari was flustered and was prompt to ask Ririsa how she feels about Masamune. Ririsa honestly answers that Masamune feels like the character Ashford, who is always there to support and help Liliel achieve her dreams. That was when Mikari realized that perhaps Ririsa might already be feeling something for Masamune, although she's still not aware of it herself. Later that evening, Masamune was conflicted if he should treat the event as some sort of date between him and Ririsa, since in a way it really is. As it turns out, he wasn't alone, and Ririsa was also feeling the same. Fortunately, Mikari was there to the rescue. After Ririsa asked her to put together a date-worthy OOTD for the event, she eventually meets Masamune at the train station and was even praised for being fashionable by him. Fashionable outfits aside, the two of them arrived at the area 4 hours earlier than the official start of the event. They were so early that all the stores and shops in the area were still closed or had just closed, so they didn't really have anywhere to hang out. After Ririsa hurt her feet while they were looking for a place to stay, they decided to stop outside a convenient store to rest and just watch the most recent episode of their favorite anime. Time flew by fast, and it was finally time for them to enter the event hall. When they finally got into their booth, Ririsa realized that she had forgotten to make the posters, cards, covers, and all the other necessary items they'd need to attract customers. Although she can just cosplay like everyone else, Ririsa is hesitant seeing, as there are tons of veteran cosplayers around, and she might just end up not getting attention at all. Right next to their booth are the duo Majino the cosplayer and Ogino, her trusted photographer and partner, both of which are very much into the event and sparing no wasted energy to promote Majino and her COSPLAY. In contrast to Ririsa and Masamune's bare booth with a non-cosplaying Ririsa, that it was no wonder no one were willing to buy from them. Although reluctant at first, Masamune finally gives his heartfelt speech, encouraging Ririsa to put on her costume and do a cosplay before the end of the event. It was an embarrassing speech that indirectly turned into a skit which attracted the people around them and somehow promoted their booth. To put it nicely, that is. Anyways, thanks to Masamune's words, Ririsa was convinced to give a last hurrah as she quickly went to the changing room to prepare. As she did, she noticed how she'd forgotten a lot of items, which made her once again lose all hope. To her surprise, however, the other cosplayers around her offered to give her their spare items without asking anything in return other than promising to someday return the favor to someone else who might be in the same situation. Not long after, with everyone's help, she's finally ready to head back to her partner as LILI. Despite Ririsa's fears from earlier, the photographers in the hallway turned their eyes on her direction as she exited the dressing room, running straight to Masamune's direction. Phew, that was something! Are you enjoying the video so far? Did you also find LILI cute? If you're enjoying the video, please make sure to give us a thumbs up and subscribe. It really means a lot to us. Immediately, Ririsa's cosplay of LILI became the center of attention, with all the cosplay fans and photographers lining up to get a chance to take a photo of her. Even Ogino was full of praises and took a spot for himself. As for Masamune, he was so proud of Ririsa for overcoming her fears as she posed for the crowd using all the original manga poses of LILI. Although there were some who kept on commenting how she's awkward at posing, only real LILI fans like Ogino could tell just how much Ririsa loved her character. After the event was over, her fellow cosplayers only had praises for Ririsa as well. The conversation then turned into recounting their personal horror stories and struggles as cosplayers. That said, Ririsa is so happy and grateful for everyone's help and promised that she'd attend the next cosplay event again. Since it had gotten late, Ririsa and Masamune had to meet at the train station. As soon as Ririsa got there, however, she began calling out for Elf Oni-san, who lent her the ruffle shorts earlier. The Elf Oni-san turned out to be Eri, a closet otaku who had no choice but to show herself, since she worked in an office around the area and Ririsa's hunt could potentially expose her secret. Eri also happens to be one of the two cosplayers that Ririsa met when she was still in middle school, the other cosplayer being Mayura, who was also Ririsa's inspiration and idol. That's why the young cosplayer could help but feel upset when she heard that Mayura had already retired as a cosplayer. But despite feeling disappointed, Ririsa is positive that as long as she keeps cosplaying in events, eventually, she'll be able to meet Mayura again someday. Speaking of being positive, as it turns out, it wasn't just Masamune, but also Ririsa, who are too dense to recognize the feelings they're starting to have for each other. Ririsa confidently declared that her love for Masamune is just as her cosplay partner, and so Masamune also interpreted his own as such. Guess Mikari's the only one happy for this development. As for Mikari, she was loitering outside the clubroom the following school day, worrying whether Ririsa had finally confessed her feelings for Masamune during the event or not. To her surprise, she came upon Ririsa inside, who was halfway through getting dressed for another cosplay photo shoot. Mikari was relieved to find out that despite everything, Ririsa still hadn't figured out that she's actually already falling for their senpai. Anyways, Ririsa had to put her uniform back on after she was summoned for her remedial classes. With Ririsa gone and Mikari the only one in the room with all of the LILI costumes, the supermodel decided to try them on and see how she'll look in it. And what do you know? Masamune just so happens to arrive in the room as soon as Mikari finished getting dressed. At first, Mikari thought that her cosplaying didn't affect Masamune, but soon realized that it actually did. Somehow, this once again encouraged her that someday she'll probably be able to get the boy to look at her the way she wants. Not long after, Ririsa also returns to the room and was really impressed by Mikari's cosplay. Fast forward to a few days later. Masamune meets with Ogino, who he asks to teach him photography skills. The older guy was generous enough that he also shared with Masamune some cosplay know-hows like the information about the top 4 cosplayers. And with the rumors of one of them retiring, there are talks that perhaps Ririsa would be the perfect candidate to take the spot. Majino and Ogino taught Masamune how important a photographer's role is to a cosplayer and how important it is that both the cosplayer and photographer had the perfect understanding of each other's personalities. And it was thanks to the two of them that Masamune was inspired to take his role as Ririsa's partner more seriously. The following school day, Masamune and Ririsa were psyching themselves up for their future cosplay events and activities when someone knocked on their club room door. The visitors were the student council representatives who informed them that the manga club is going to lose their club room, seeing as they had not complied with the requirements to deserve it, and for the last 3 years at that. Not only will their club be demoted to a meeting group, their club room will also be given to the aquarium club, who had just gained the qualifications to become a full-fledged club. Masamune felt responsible for the club's situation, especially when his senpais had already mentioned it to him before. Not wanting to lose the place that'll help Ririsa fulfill her dream, Masamune promised the younger girl that he'll do something about their problem. And so, Masamune went to the student council office where he was given a list of guidelines that they'll have to comply if they want to keep their club status. Most of them seemed to be doable except for the club advisor. The manga club president went to the available faculty to ask if someone was willing to take them in, but had no luck. That is until one of the teachers suggested that he ask the new teacher named Han Yu. To Masamune's surprise, the new home ec teacher, Han Yu, is in fact the cosplayer Mayura, whom Ririsa idolizes a lot. She had retired from cosplaying so she can officially join the workforce. After all, what kind of teacher goes around cosplaying and dressed up in sexy costumes, right? Unfortunately, even though Masamune informed her that their club's interests centered on manga and cosplay, Mayura was adamant that she won't take part of it. This forced Masamune to use dirty tricks by baiting Mayura with a copy of her own costume, which turned out great in the end, seeing as Mayura is smitten by Ririsa the moment she saw her in the clubroom cosplaying as LILI. Then again, although Mayura agreed to be their advisor, it wouldn't be enough to solve their clubroom problem since they still have to write a report that would include relevant club activities. Masamune had some ideas, although it was an epic fail. Anyways, Mayura suggested that they do a community service reading manga to the local elementary school kids. On their first day, the two struggled since the kids won't even give them a glance, much more listen. Fortunately, they were able to solve this dilemma by having Ririsa cosplay as a LILI in PG, of course, and have her read to the kids. The effect was phenomenal, and Masamune was finally able to take good photos for their club activity documentations. A few days later, Masamune was finally able to complete the report for the student council, although just when they were about to turn it in, Ririsa raised a concern, to which Masamune seemed to agree as well. The following day, Masamune and Ririsa informed their advisor that they won't be sending the report about the manga reading activity they did as a club activity, much to Mayura's astonishment. In return for not submitting the community service they did for the elementary kids, Masamune and Ririsa decided to participate in the Yokosuka cosplay event and use that in their activity report instead. Mayura was against it, seeing as she already had a first-hand experience of how the society in general treats cosplayers like them. She was pretty sure that there's a good chance it won't be accepted by the student council. But Ririsa was determined to go through with it, and Masamune was right behind her. Eventually, Mayura was convinced, although she warns them that they should perform well in the event, if not be the best. We are then introduced to a new character, who also happens to be one of the top 4 cosplay queens. Nagomi. She's a pro cosplayer who cosplays popular characters and is sponsored by a huge company. Just her presence alone is bound to raise the bar for the cosplayers in the event. A few days later, the day of the event arrived. Fortunately, Majino and Ogino are also there to guide Ririsa and Masamune. On their way to the dressing room, however, Majino and Ririsa encounters Nagomi, who seemed to recognize Ririsa as the one who cosplayed LILI. The conversation was friendly at first, until Nagomi started being too sensitive, as if wanting to start a drama of sorts. Although Ririsa tried to not let it affect her, it was obvious that Nagomi's words got to her. Even Majino could tell how Ririsa's confidence was really hurt by Nagomi's dissing. As for Ogino and Masamune, they were discussing a strategy to maximize their chances of attracting people to their booths and, in turn, their respective cosplayers. Although nervous, Masamune was fully prepared to do his best. Phew. With the introduction of new characters, the story also gets more interesting. Here's a question for you. Did cosplaying ever cross your mind? Halloween costumes doesn't count though. Please share us your thoughts in the comments below. Using the excuse that she's attending the event to support her students, Mayuri couldn't help but get overwhelmed after once again coming to a cosplay event. Especially in this particular building that she's been to countless of times already, her body seemed to get into auto drive as she moved around. Meanwhile, Nagomi expresses her worries regarding Ririsa. She admitted to her managers how the young cosplayer reminded her of Mayura, the one cosplayer she couldn't ever beat despite giving it her best to cosplay. The worst part is that Mayura even suddenly retired. With regards to Ririsa, the pro cosplayer believes that if her words were enough to bring down Ririsa's confidence, then she's not going to survive in the cosplaying business. Unfortunately, Nagomi's words really did have a huge effect on Ririsa's mental and emotional state, to the point that she hadn't even started preparing even when everyone else was just about done. Not long after Majino joins Masamune and Ogino, and together they witness just how a pro cosplayer grabs the attention of people. Despite Nagomi's character being new and barely had any information available, she was still able to embody it and make it her very own. Back to Ririsa, she informs her senpai that she couldn't find her LILI skirt. Masamune immediately went to her side to try and console her along with Majino and Ogino. However, it only resulted in Ririsa getting more depressed with Nagomi's words still weighing heavily in her head. After Ririsa and Masamune almost got into an argument, the boy left Ririsa by herself with Majino and Ogino. That was when Mayura revealed herself and tried to do what she was supposed to do as their club advisor only for Ririsa to once again make her realize another valuable lesson instead. Mayura then left Ririsa on her own, only to return shortly after wearing the costume that she was supposed to debut in the previous winter comiquette. Once again, Mayura tried to do her job as the club advisor as she tried to bring back Ririsa's confidence, and along the way made the young girl realize that the cosplayer Mayura and her home ec teacher Mayura are one and the same. Just then, Masamune arrives with the cosplayer who accidentally took Ririsa's skirt. After a dramatic and cringy speech from Masamune, Ririsa finally gained the confidence to once again try to cosplay for the event. The only problem is that Nagomi's photo shoot is about to end, which means the majority of the people attending the event will also be going home. That's to say, by the time Ririsa finished getting ready, the spectators and the audience would have long disappeared. This time, it was Mayura who came to the rescue as she once again reveals herself and hints that it's her turn to help. If you wanted to know what happens next and you're enjoying our content, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Your support will help our channel grow and encourage us to make more videos. Hey guys, we're back with part 2 of this series. Are you excited to know what happens next? Well, we gotcha. Following Mayura's declaration previously, Ogino and Masamune headed back to the crowd of people who couldn't get enough of Nagomi. Not to take photos like the rest of them, though, but just as spectators. Ogino could tell that the photo shoot was just about to end, and they were in a bind on what to do since Ririsa was far from ready. Fortunately, as she promised, Mayura arrives at the scene, surprising everyone and dividing the crowd. A good number of the people taking Nagomi's pictures just a couple of seconds ago are now forming a circle around Mayura, much to Nagomi's frustration. As expected, the pro cosplayer isn't one to easily back down. She takes up Mayura's implied challenge and takes her cosplaying a notch higher with bolder poses and moves. But for some reason it's not working. Nagomi then visits memory lane and recalls when she and Mayura were still cosplaying together. Although they consider each other rivals, they're also still very good friends. But even then, Nagomi is already very jealous of how good and popular Mayura is as a cosplayer, even though she only ever played one character in her career. What Nagomi doesn't know, however, is that Mayura also felt the same towards her. Mayura is jealous of Nagomi, who loves cosplaying so much that she's not afraid to let everyone else know and see, unlike her. Suddenly, Mayura started walking away, leaving Nagomi very confused. Right at that moment, though, Ririsa arrives on the scene. Immediately, the photographers in the area couldn't help but turn to her direction and admire her costume. Now, Nagomi's target of contempt is Ririsa. It turns out the reason why she said all those mean things to the newbie cosplayer was because she was jealous of how Ririsa genuinely loves the character she cosplays and in return enjoys cosplaying it. It wasn't that long ago when she too was like Ririsa, but somehow along the way, she lost her direction and forgot why she started cosplaying in the first place. Seeing Ririsa in person and enjoying herself as she cosplays, Nagomi was reminded of her past self. As Nagomi starts posing for the camera with a genuine smile on her face, she knows that for the first time in a long time, she can finally forgive herself and go back to how she used to be. As Ririsa continued to give her best posing for the photographers as LILI, Ogino couldn't help observing how the newbie cosplayer's strength is her huge arsenal of LILI poses and expressions. She memorized all the poses that LILI fans had once dreamed of being acted out in 2D. Meanwhile, Ririsa recalls the words that Nagomi said to her before the event. She might not know her real reason for being a cosplayer then, but now she realizes that cosplaying makes her feel safe and confident to be who she wants to be. As for Nagomi, she's just really thankful that Ririsa made her realize what cosplaying meant for her, and is just happy to be sharing the stage with Ririsa, whom she unconsciously considers a rival. Once the event concludes, Ririsa once again leaves the photographers wondering who she is. Ririsa goes inside the building and goes straight to hug Masamune as she apologizes for all the trouble she caused. And as expected, her senpai didn't mind it at all and was just glad to be there for her, much like how Mayura felt as she left the building. Not long after, as she did, however, Eri tearfully calls out to her. Despite the violent start of their reunion, the two eventually shared a heartwarming moment, with hopes that this time they'll be able to keep on being friends, even with Mayura deciding to retire. Back inside the building, Ririsa was just about to go to the changing room when she bumped into Nagomi. It was a friendly exchange this time, and the two even took a selfie together. Nagomi could really imagine herself being friends with Ririsa. That is, until she realized that the Kai-sama look-alike she had been dying to meet all day was, in fact, Ririsa's photographer. Not missing her chance, though, Nagomi exchanged numbers with Masamune and encouraged him to cosplay. Not long after, Nagomi also gets a dose of confidence when she has the use of the public changing room and has a reality check that it was just her who thinks that everyone hates her. In fact, a lot of cosplayers like her and celebrate the fact that she's a professional cosplayer. Going forward, Nagomi will definitely be more approachable and friendly to all cosplayers and events. Later on, before leaving the events area, Nagomi approaches Ririsa and encourages her to participate in the summer comiket, promising to have her back if things get tough for her. On their way home, Masamune and Ririsa are on a train and are seen as a couple by others, even by Mayura, who just happens to be nearby. She even heard Ririsa tell Masamune how much she loved him and made him promise to stay with her for a long time. Mayura thought that the two were actually a thing, only to realize later the bitter reality that she had just become the advisor of two idiots who couldn't even tell that they liked each other. The next day, Mayura submits the club's report to the principal herself and pleads to let the two continue with their activities as a club with full privileges. Although the principal doesn't look like he minds, he still wants the student council to make the decision. As for Ririsa, she just got into their room when Mikari comes to her and anxiously asks Ririsa what she had just done. Although their classmates were all abuzz about Ririsa's mysterious altar, that was not what Mikari was making a fuss about. As it turns out, despite all the supplemental classes that Ririsa is taking, she still managed to fail all her subjects. Guess the supplemental classes will continue going forward, huh? Later in the afternoon, Masamune and Mayura were alone in the club room and discussing the result of the club activity report that they submitted. Mayura told Masamune that although the school accepted their report, there was a condition. That's to say, they can't go public with their activities. In fact, it seems like it was only the principal and the student council president who actually knew about their arrangements. Masamune was a little upset as he wondered if cosplaying was really something that they should hide. Mayura then explains to him that the condition was not because the school was ashamed of them. Going back to the conversation that Mayura had with the principal after submitting the club's activity report, he tells Mayura that although the teachers may be supportive of their activities, the same thing couldn't be said about their schoolmates. In the worst-case scenario, they may get teased and bullied. Negative rumors could also be spread on the internet about Ririsa, which might force her to give up cosplaying eventually, which is something that Mayura could somehow relate to. Back to the present, once Masamune heard the reasoning behind the verdict, it was easy for him to accept it. Ririsa had the same thoughts as well when she was filled in about the results later on. They're just really glad that they can keep their club room and continue with their cosplaying activities. With everything now settled, they can freely do other activities as well, just like playing video games, where Mayura effortlessly beats Masamune using Lustalot. Speaking of Mayura and her favorite character, Ririsa asks Mayura to teach her sewing skills, which the veteran cosplayer didn't say no to. As the two started their lessons, Mikari, who also came to hang out, got busy chatting on her phone with her manager regarding getting permission for something, concluding the conversation by declaring that she'll talk directly to the company president herself. On another occasion, Masamune was having a videoless video call with Ogino, where the latter informed Masamune about Mr. Camera. It seems that this persona is one of the legendary figures in the cosplay world, seeing as everyone they feature in their blog makes it big. And this time they made another entry titled Make Way for the 5 Rising Stars of Cosplay, where Ririsa's Liliel ranked 5th. Although Masamune was quite upset at first that his Liliel only ranked 5th in the list, Ririsa made him realize later on how cosplaying isn't really a competition, and that every cosplayer is comrades who share a love for the same thing. Meanwhile, we get a foreshadowing of a new character who seemed quite upset that Liliel only made it in 5th place on Mr. Camera's list. One weekend, Masamune and Ririsa went on a trip to a fabric shop, not just to replenish her stock of materials, but also to find inspiration for her next costume. During which she was approached by a girl who Ririsa recognized to be Nonoa, the fourth placer on Mr. Camera's 5 Rising Cosplay Star blog. She looked so fierce and intimidating as she handed a flyer for a Cinderella Star cosplay event to Ririsa. Ririsa later shares this news to Masamune, who also wonders if it was some sort of a call for challenge, given that Nonoa looked quite furious. Nevertheless, Ririsa decides to take on the challenge and assures Masamune that she'll get her costume done in a week by the day of the event. Meanwhile, Nonoa gets back home and changes into her favorite cosplay avatar, where she feels comfortable. It was then revealed that despite how she may have looked earlier, she really means no harm to Ririsa and just wants to befriend her. But the thing is that she has social anxiety, which prevents her from even expressing herself. Fast forward to a week later, Ririsa and Masamune went to the event's location together with Mayura. Nagomi was also present, seeing as she is the official guest of the event. As for Nonoa, after eavesdropping on the four as they were catching up, she realized that she actually gave a terrible first impression of Ririsa, and that Ririsa had thought that the flyer she gave her was actually a letter of challenge. We then go back to memory lane on Nonoa's short backstory, where it's revealed how she also adores Liliel as a kid. Back then, Nonoa had always been an otaku. She used to be very popular among her friends then, but after everyone grew up, they eventually cast aside all the otaku-ness and made her an outcast, leaving her without any friends. But all hope wasn't lost after she found out about cosplaying and eventually tried it herself. After all, it's a world where everyone can be friends while enjoying the same hobbies. Shortly after, she found out about Liliel's cosplayer and wanted to become friends with her. And that's why Nonoa wanted to have a good first impression on Ririsa, although that wasn't what happened. Every time she tries to approach Ririsa and talk to her, she just ends up showing hostility and can't even utter a single word out. Later on, as Ririsa and Nonoa took the center stage, Ririsa herself approached Nonoa to try and take a photo shoot together. Of course, it was something that Nonoa herself wanted so badly as well. Unfortunately, she once again couldn't say anything, and it eventually looked like she was coldly rejecting Ririsa's invitation. When Nonoa couldn't take it anymore, she ran away from the area, all the while regretting what she just did. Once she was out of the building, dark thoughts started consuming her as she remembered how her social anxiety had started. Before these thoughts totally took over, however, Masamune suddenly showed up as he tried to talk to her. For some reason, Nonoa is just so easy to relate to. Is it the same for you? Well, I'm telling you guys, it's not something to be ashamed of. And you don't have to cosplay just to be one. If you enjoyed our content, please don't forget to like and subscribe so you'll get notified of our next update.